She didn't knock, she didn't call, she didn't leave a note. Margaret Holloway, president of the Maplewood Estates HOA, simply walked into my backyard, directed two men with a truck, and had everything removed. Everything, including the $14,000 in specialized medical equipment that was keeping my 9-year-old daughter alive. And the most unbelievable part? She thought she had every right to do it. She was wrong. And within 72 hours, she would find out exactly how wrong, in handcuffs. Before I tell you what happened next, if you're new here, this is HOA Shield, the channel where HOA overreach meets its match. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications because we post stories exactly like this every single week. Now, back to Margaret. My daughter Lily was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis when she was 14 months old. If you don't know what that is, it's a progressive genetic disease that attacks the lungs and digestive system. By the time Lily was 6, her pulmonologist had prescribed a daily treatment regimen that required 3 specific pieces of medical equipment: a high-frequency chest wall oscillation vest, which runs about $11,000, a medical-grade nebulizer compressor, and a portable oxygen concentrator for her harder breathing days. Together, that equipment was worth just over $14,000. And because Lily's treatments had to happen on a strict schedule, morning and evening, every single day, we kept everything in a small, locked, weatherproof storage unit in our backyard. It was 4 feet wide and 6 feet tall. It looked like a garden shed, clean, gray, tucked against the back fence, and it had been there for 3 years without a single complaint. When we first moved into Maplewood Estates, I did everything right. I submitted an architectural modification request to the HOA before I ever had the unit installed. I included the dimensions, the color, the exact placement coordinates, and the purpose. I even attached a letter from Lily's pulmonologist explaining the medical necessity of climate-controlled equipment storage. The board approved it. In writing. I have the email. I have the signed approval form with 2 board signatures. I kept every single document in a labeled folder that I never once threw away. Because when you have a medically fragile child and you live under an HOA, you learn very quickly to keep everything. Margaret Holloway became HOA board president about 18 months after we moved in. I didn't think much of it at first. She introduced herself at a community pool meeting, smiled a great deal, and talked about preserving property values and maintaining community standards. I smiled back and went home to give Lily her evening treatment. I had no reason to think this woman would ever affect my life in any meaningful way. The first letter arrived that November. It was a formal violation notice on HOA letterhead. It cited my backyard storage unit as an unapproved structure in violation of Section 4.7 of the Community Guidelines, which stated that structures exceeding 36 inches in width required annual renewal of architectural approval. I had never heard of this rule, because it hadn't existed when my unit was originally approved. I later confirmed, through county records and a copy of the HOA's own previous bylaws, that this provision had been added just 4 months earlier, in an emergency session that no homeowner on my street had been notified about. I responded in writing within 5 days. I attached my original approval letter, Lily's doctor's letter, a copy of her most recent pulmonology report, and a clear, polite statement that my structure had been approved under the guidelines in effect at the time of installation, and that retroactive enforcement of new rules against previously approved modifications was not legally enforceable. I also CC'd the HOA's contracted management company. I kept a copy of everything I sent. Margaret's response came 8 days later. Another violation notice. This one included a fine, $250, payable within 30 days. It stated that my response had been reviewed and denied by the board and that the structure must be removed within 60 days or additional fines would begin accruing at $50 per week. I did not pay the fine. I did not remove the structure. Instead, I consulted a real estate attorney who confirmed what I already suspected. Retroactive application of new HOA bylaws to structures approved under prior guidelines was legally problematic, and my written approval created a documented, protected right to maintain the unit. My attorney sent a formal letter to the HOA on my behalf. It was professional, precise, and unambiguous. Margaret escalated anyway. Over the next 6 weeks, I received 4 additional violation notices. Each one introduced a new alleged infraction. The shed was now cited for being improperly anchored to the ground, then for having a non-compliant latch mechanism, then, and I want you to hear this clearly, for obstructing natural light flow to adjacent vegetation. My attorney called it a coordinated bad faith violation campaign designed to bury me in paperwork until I gave up. She was already preparing a formal legal response when everything changed. On a Thursday morning in March, I took Lily to her quarterly pulmonology appointment. We left at 8 in the morning and returned just before noon. When I came home, the storage unit was gone. The ground where it had stood for 3 years was scraped clean. There was a single sheet of paper tucked under my back door mat. It was an HOA enforcement notice stating that, in accordance with Section 4.7 and the board's enforcement authority, the non-compliant structure and its contents had been removed by a contracted service provider and were being held pending resolution of outstanding violations and accrued fines totaling $840. Contents. She had taken the contents. Lily's chest oscillation vest, her nebulizer compressor, her oxygen concentrator, $14,200 worth of prescribed, irreplaceable medical equipment. Equipment Lily needed that same evening for her scheduled treatment. I stood in my backyard for about 30 seconds, just standing, just breathing. And then I called my attorney. And then I called the police. 2 officers arrived within 20 minutes. I walked them through everything. I showed them the original architectural approval with the board's signatures. I showed them Lily's prescriptions and the doctor's letter confirming the equipment was medically necessary. I showed them the HOA notice that explicitly admitted to removing the contents. I showed them the equipment invoices, totaling $14,200. One of the officers stepped away and made a phone call. The other wrote in his notepad for a long time. They asked me who had authorized the removal. I showed them Margaret's name printed at the bottom of the enforcement notice. They asked me if I wanted to press charges. I said yes. What Margaret apparently did not understand, what all her smug, stacked violation notices had never accounted for, is that in our state, theft of personal property valued at $10,000 or more is classified as a Class B felony, grand larceny. It does not matter whether she believed she had HOA authority. HOA bylaws do not supersede state criminal statutes. An HOA board president does not hold the legal authority to enter private residential property and remove personal belongings worth $14,000. She was not a law enforcement officer. She was not a court-appointed marshal. She was a woman with a clipboard, a contractor who didn't ask the right questions, and no understanding whatsoever of what she had just done. 71 hours after I came home to an empty patch of dirt where my daughter's equipment used to be, Margaret Holloway was arrested at her home. The equipment had been located at a commercial storage facility she had rented under the HOA's vendor account. It was recovered that same afternoon and returned to us before Lily's evening treatment. She did not miss a single session. The criminal case moved forward. Margaret hired an attorney. Her attorney argued she had acted in good faith under the scope of her HOA authority. The district attorney's office was unmoved. So was the judge. Margaret eventually accepted a plea agreement. She paid full restitution. She resigned from the HOA board. And she received a conviction on her record that she will carry for a very long time. I attended the next community HOA meeting. The new interim board president opened the session by announcing that the HOA would be conducting a full legal review of every bylaw amendment and violation notice issued in the prior 24 months. Several of those notices, mine included, were formally withdrawn that evening. My storage unit was reinstalled 2 weeks later at the HOA's expense in the exact location it had always occupied. Same footprint, same approval, same fence line. Lily is 10 now. She doesn't know most of what happened. She knows her equipment was gone for one afternoon and then came back. She knows I was upset. She asked me once why some people are mean, and I told her honestly that I don't have a great answer for that. But I told her that when people try to take what belongs to you, you don't yell and you don't beg. You document. You call the right people, and you let the law do what it was designed to do. That is exactly what this was. Not a revenge story, a documentation story, a law story. Margaret didn't lose because I was louder or angrier. She lost because I kept every email, every letter, every receipt, and every approval form from the very beginning. And because what she did already had a name. That name was a felony. So I want to know, what would you have done? Would you have paid the fine and hoped it went away? Or would you have gone to the mat the same way? Tell me in the comments. And if this story made your blood boil or gave you even a little bit of hope that documentation and the law still win, please like this video and subscribe to HOA Shield. We tell stories exactly like this every week because no HOA board president gets to decide that your child's medical equipment is a community eyesore. Not here, not on this channel, not ever. I will see you in the next one.